the last few weeks, we got to the point where the need for the Eightfold Path was revealed to us, and now we are in part 2, which is just learning about the different parts of the Eightfold Path. We start out, I mean, I don't know, this first section here seems to just drive home that the Buddha felt this is the most important thing. Even dying? Even when dying, that it was important to communicate this as an intro to this
Yeah.
section. So chapter 9. So it seems that each chapter is just about each of the 8 on the path. So first one, chapter 9 is about right view, and harkens back to the 4 kinds of nutriments. We have the right view is knowing which of the 4 kinds of nutriments that we have ingested have brought about what has come to be. And if we remember from the previous chapter, that was food, sense impressions, intention or volition, and consciousness are the 4 nutriments. So being aware of which area of ourselves or our behavior is bringing about the suffering that we are currently experiencing. So also right after that, that Shariputra described right view as the ability to distinguish wholesome roots from unwholesome roots, and that each of us has both wholesome and unwholesome roots or seeds, to bring back that imagery from previous chapters, in the depths of our consciousness, and that depending again on what we water, that is what we develop or become. Ooh, oh my gosh. I almost dumped water all over my tablet.
I will say, it's interesting that. So I obviously that is also what I got from things is the watering of the seeds. He really focuses on it throughout the chapter. But it was really interesting to me when he starts out that the right view is this faith that other people have been able to transform their suffering, and I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't really thought about it before. Was that we have to have faith that it's possible in the first place, you know?
Yeah,
I thought that was interesting.
that is a good one too, yes. That was right before the other, wasn't it? The right here. I don't know if anybody highlights things after the fact, but
Oh
I like
yeah.
to point them out. Um, yeah, then there's a lot of repetition, but I felt again that it was for a good reason. And, wording these in slightly different ways, hoping that one of them will stick with you. Because of all as much as he says, don't memorize and we shouldn't have to repeat all of these chants and whatnot to practice, it is important that we do know what these are to be able to practice them and remind ourselves. Okay.
On that paragraph, you're just going by real
Mm-hmm.
quick. Near the bottom there, I highlighted when we become aware of the seeds in our storehouse, we will not be surprised by our own behavior or the behavior of others. And I think it just ties into a lot of the mindfulness and the self awareness and like almost emotional intelligence that I really feel gets pushed in this sort of
Mm-hmm.
practice. And I thought it was a really nice way of putting it of like when we can be aware of our own, like what are we storing inside of us, we become of our the intricacies of our actions and also others. So I enjoyed that. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, it's really basically be aware of your biases.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, I think.
I once did a meditation on this that maybe mentioned. Basically, normally you just kind of like let the thoughts go right away, but this time you try to catch each thought and categorize it into the 3 unwholesome or 3 wholesome roots. And then you can sort of run a running statistic like how are you doing? What is your mind generating? And
Mm-hmm.
it tends to be kind of unwholesome, at least for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another aspect of this maybe, well, maybe indirectly, but I think this is what it's getting at, is kind of the concept of karma as well. That the things that you're doing and the energy you're putting out is going to influence what other people do, what happens in your environment, and what's being sent back to you
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
in a, you if you understand the seeds in yourself that are causing your behaviors, not only can you understand your behavior, but you can see why maybe somebody else is responding in the way they do to what you just
Right.
did. And that's very important. That's a core concept we need to remember. Yeah, we have a lot. I highlighted a lot of repetitive things. Recognize which seeds are wholesome and encourage those seeds to be watered. Selective touching. Being mindful about the foods that we ingest. But I think, like, oh, I guess there's actually a lot.
I
There's actually
don't
a lot in this chapter before
know.
the.
It's right there on that page where it says, "Am I sure?" I highlighted that, and I ended up going back to it a couple times after reading this particular section, and I even added it into my notebook that I use for some teaching stuff because I really like what he says here, and then he continues that thought later on in the chapters of asking yourself, am I sure? What perceptions could be
Yeah.
influencing the situation that could be influencing the way I'm thinking and the making those thoughts incorrect or unhelpful. And I find as a teacher, I often need to, in order to be effective or compassionate, I have to ask myself these things constantly of am I sure that I'm right? Or as I am fond of putting, is this a hill worth dying on? And asking yourself, what is the realities of the situation from all the multifaceted ways that it can come from. So anyway, I liked that the way he put that and puts that question out there.
Yeah, all the step by step is very helpful. That comes on later on. You're right. That does repeat. Um, this was a really important paragraph too. That, like, reminding ourselves that you can only, like, by default, until you work to not do it this way, when you're perceiving something, it's your point of view, but there are others, and maybe there could be something that's hidden from you. That this deception, that if you could come at it from a slightly different angle, maybe you would see the thing you're missing.
Yeah.
And that most of our suffering comes from wrong perceptions. So this is maybe one of the most urgent things to work on, to learning how to see it for what's really there and not be deceived by, first glance.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, this bit where it sounds a little bit more like some other philosophy books that we may read. Perception means the coming into existence of the perceiver and the perceived. And the flower we're looking at is part of our consciousness. Something that sounds like kind of strange if somebody were to just quote this or read this without reading the context of it.
Yeah, that really harkens back to Nagarjuna for me. Basically, I mean, I'm very bad with Nagarjuna, but it's yeah, basically he says there is no one who just but watching happens, something along that line. So yeah, the one cannot exist without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to have something be perceived, there has to be a perceiver, and vice versa. It's eternal.
Oh, where does he say it that when you are perceiving a thing, you are the thing? When we perceive the moon is us.
Yeah,
He says it. And I thought that was
I think it's
a lovely way to start thinking about it. Like I've recalled hitting on this topic in other ways before, but the simple way he puts it of like when we perceive the moon is us. I don't know. It just hit different. I liked it. It was interesting.
yeah, definitely a way to maybe change how we think about all of the things that maybe irritate us, or
Yay.
is actually a reflection of your own mind. Oh, which here, extension of that on the next page here. But our perceptions are made of our afflictions, craving, anger, ignorance, wrong views, and prejudice. And whether we are happy or we suffer depends largely on perceptions. It is important to look deeply at our perceptions and know their source.
Mm-hmm.
That the thing that's inside of us is shaping the way that we are perceiving everything that's seemingly outside. Just driving that point home about the moon is us, the flower is us,
Yeah.
everything that we look at.
On this same page, he says talks about the idea of happiness and that only certain conditions will make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm faced with this a lot, and it goes back to that, like, what are our perceptions? What are our attachments to those perceptions? What are our expectations that are getting let down, right? All these things cause suffering. And I think he's got a real point of, like, because we build up a narrative or an idea of what it means to be someone who is happy or in a circumstance that is worth being happy in, we become unhappy just from that. That not aligning. Sorry. Finish that.
Mm-hmm. I also highlighted that part. I've seen this a lot especially in the people around me. They'll recognize that some condition of life is undesirable for them, or it's causing more suffering, or they're not
Mm-hmm.
really excited about the place they're in. And instead of sitting down and really questioning what has happened, why is it like this, what am I doing that could affect this, or how might I change it, they seem to latch on to the first thing that seems like it would be a good idea. Like, oh, well, this thing would be so much preferable to what I have now. And then becoming obsessed with that, which back in what we did a couple weeks ago, talking about volition and intention and how those obsessions stay with us even when we're sleeping, that everything in our life kind of focuses on this point. And if we have this one idea of I'll be happy if I don't know,
Right.
become rich or famous or get this job or buy this item, or whatever the fixation is. And now not only are you not living very mindfully, ignoring all the things that are maybe more important, but you're probably not going to achieve whatever that thing is that you think is going to make you happy, which kind of keeps you in this eternal unhappy state.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, but why are we in eternal unhappy state? Is it capitalism? Is it biology? Like, what is it?
Because we exist.
Samsara. Okay, I take it.
No, that's how I see it. If anyone has a more intricate way of saying it, I would love to hear it. But I assume suffering to be the default state of existence. I'm going to be honest.
I heard that's something I saw in a video that was by Swami. Oh, what's his name? I forgot his name, but he basically says, I think he said that the cause of suffering is ignorance, and ignorance is is the default state. Ignorance is without beginning. It's what we are born into, basically. Because we cannot distinguish what is real, quote unquote, real and unreal. But that's a bit of a different pair of shoes. Or maybe not.
No, I think that's definitely related. Actually, I was going to say just in this chapter, according to this chapter, the cause of that, I mean, even in the same paragraph, we believe certain things will make us happy. It's often our idea of happiness and everything that we were just talking about that prevents us from being happy. We have to look deeply into our perceptions in order to become free of them. So that, and again, the whole thing being about right view, that if you can see clearly, if you can understand it as it really is, you won't strive for those things and you won't be so caught up in that. Literally, they said the prescription for ending suffering is to follow the Eightfold Path, right?
Yeah.
Although here it says right view is not a path, though. It is the insight we have into the reality of life, a living insight that fills us with understanding, peace, and love.
As a parent who is concerned I will fail at this job entirely as my child gets older, I really appreciated this beginning part of this next area, and where he says all we can do is stimulate the seeds of right view in them. And I think I found that kind of reassuring of, you know, things are going to get difficult and interesting, but all I can do is try to help plant some good seeds in their little gardens. So
I mean, that sounds great, but how are you gonna do that?
Bala, if you got the answer, I want to hear it because I have no idea.
Yeah, I couldn't have.
Oh,
So
I like the idea of it a lot. And I think sometimes I get fixated on too many details, too complicated of an approach, right? But I think that if I'm doing the rest of the practice, if I'm approaching my son with mindfulness and with the understanding that he doesn't have nearly as many experiences as I do, right? Like, he's frustrated because he's hungry. Because this is, like, you know what I mean? And not that I don't get hangry, but that he sounds like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Well, it kind of is, you know?
It literally could be.
It could be, in fact, the worst thing that's ever happened to him in his tiny existence. And so I think if I'm doing those practices that we're meant to follow, then I will hopefully automatically be planting good seeds as he watches me do that practice. And in time comes to understand that I've been practicing mindfulness and patience and understanding, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's the hope. That's the dream.
yeah, I think that makes sense. It just, I think at least until probably a certain age, I don't think the kids like really think this way or operate this way. Like, do you watch like a little kid and like oh look, how suffering they are. Life is suffering for them. Not usually, right? They don't
Right.
seem to be that way.
I think when it comes down to it, though, practicing that mindfulness, though, is so important because it's easy, because I have so many experiences, to let go of an offhanded, hurtful comment. You know what I mean? But I need to be so mindful of what I say to my child because it could be so profound it haunts them for 20 years. You know?
Yeah.
Like something I consider unremarkable, offhanded, could have a lasting impact and could be the one thing they fixate on and defines our relationship, for the rest of forever. Mm-hmm. Because I said something that maybe I didn't mean in a grander scheme, but was very defining in that moment for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to be careful there because my hobby is to remember things from like when I was 5 years old and then telling my parents what they told me back then.
Well, see, exactly. That's a great example.
No, I don't think you can do it perfectly, but I don't think they're probably quite like robust. And like one utterance is not gonna destroy them, right? It's more like the whole thing all at once.
Well, it's yes and no, isn't it? Sometimes children do fixate on particular words for one reason or another. Or it could be laying a foundation for them to doubt other things that may be, in fact, more true, right? It's not maybe helpful for us to fixate on every little thing because they also may not care and not remember. Even 2 hours later, they may have forgotten, But being mindful, I think that at least the approach sounds like the right thing to do, right? Okay, being aware that things that you do can affect your child in maybe more pronounced ways than it would affect any other person that you would say that to, including someone else's child.
Yeah, it's ultimately mostly just assuming that it's not going to make an impact, right? Like, even if I don't fixate on like this is going to have an impact, what I need to do is not assume that like they won't remember. It's fine. Like,
we're also communicating. I mean, there's a lot of the it's important for kids to learn in a realistic way too that hey, sometimes people say things that they don't really mean, and once they're like, I don't know, 4, they already know that sometimes they've said or done something that wasn't really how they felt when in the heat
Mm-hmm.
of the moment with their friend or whatever. And
Sure, yeah.
for them to learn that everybody has this those feelings sometimes, and everybody has had a point where they've said or done something that wasn't really true to themselves, and it's important that we can recognize that. And I recognize that I did something like that with you, and I want you to know that that's not really how I feel, and that's not really what I think about you, and this is how I really think about you. And like even modeling something like that, that I made a mistake and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have very good control over my speech or my behavior, but I'm going to do better, and I want to make sure that you know that you're important to me. And, even something like that, even the mistakes, it's how you handle them
Right, absolutely.
that also shows them, oh, there's another way to be, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree.
Don't stress about it, Des.
I, I, I will try. I will do it anyway, but thank you.
But you're aware that you're doing it. This is the first step, right? Oh, okay. Moving on. We didn't even get through the first chapter yet. We're
Sorry.
halfway. No, I think that that's still an important topic, but I also don't want us to
Gosh.
go to like an extra hour. Unless you all want to. I could talk about this a long time. Um,
So,
what is it?
not to stop you from moving forward, but yeah, that page. Oh no, wait, what page is it?
Well, here's where we were.
Yes, it's not that page. It's not that one. That one. No. Dang it. Oh well. There is a page somewhere, um, where he talks about somebody coming up. Oh, yes, I remember. Okay, so it's the one with the weird symbols on it. It's like a weird picture of the symbols. And he says, I think I put it in the quotes channel. It was hilarious. No, it was above there. Sorry, it's still in the same
Oh,
chapter. And
okay.
it he pointed out a way of sitting meditation, and I was trying to explain this to someone the other day. It was like, oftentimes
Here.
somebody who hasn't really gotten into meditation thinks that, oh, I'm failing if I'm thinking of anything. And I'm like, no. You're practicing mindfulness in a lot of ways. And so it's hilarious what he says. It's like, I'm breathing in and I'm thinking about tomato soup. And that was hilarious to me. But also, I thought a great little image of like, he's not fighting the thought about the tomato soup. He accepts it's there, right? We can't just ignore it. We breathe it in and then we try not to cling to it, Like, yep, I am practicing mindfulness. I'm breathing, and there's that image of tomato soup. Yep, it's still there.
Yeah, instead of just thinking of the tomato soup, he's saying, well, you're already being mindful if you go, a thought of tomato soup has crossed my mind.
Yes.
Which then you can think why.
And I just enjoyed that. I don't know. It was fun.
I did wonder why tomato soup specifically. Was he thinking of tomato soup while writing the book?
Maybe. Entirely possible, I feel like.
Or did he say, what's a thing that maybe is, very mundane that many people may think of? Tomato soup?
I think it's a product placement.
Yep. This is big tomato soup getting in on the book.
Big tomato working with big soup, yes.
Yeah. 100%.
I'm all for big soup.
Oh, big soup. Soup is awesome.
It already has taken unwholesome root in you.
The little chart he includes is weird. The figure 3, right before chapter 10 is really weird, but I like how it's just like, look, everything's connected.
That chart reminded me a bit of the charts in the other book we read a while back, that How to Be a Stoic.
Oh, yes.
Also had those a bit pointless charts.
Ugh. There it is. There's the chart.
Yeah, there are probably a lot of ways we could draw this as well, but
I think the last sentence he puts right into that chart is probably the most important, which is right view is both a cause and an effect of all other elements of the path.
Yes, thank you for saying it. Yes.
I think that is the best little summary I get of what I'm trying to get from the chart, and it's nice.
and then seemingly all of them are both a
Yeah,
cause and effect, which if we can go back up, because I think this is kind of what he was talking about in this paragraph about, you begin to practice, like we're reading, if you're somebody who's never heard of this before and you pick up this book and then you start to try to do these things and you understood the words you read, but sometimes it's not as effective because you haven't actually done all of it yet. And then maybe you don't do it quite right when you start to do it. Saying we have to put those views, like our understanding, into practice, but that the more that we practice, the more that we're reflecting, our views become increasingly wise based on our real experience. So the more that you do it, the better that you get at it, the more sense it'll make, the more successful you'll be. And doing right, like practicing right view, you're also going to be starting to do these other things automatically. Or if you do any of these other things, you start to find right view more easily. And I think, yeah, kind of this, I guess it's well placed between those two ideas, but that everything is connected in this way the more you do it. And maybe that to some degree you can't help doing the others once you're doing one, right?
You really can't. I mean, once you start with one of them, you start having to like dig into it and find out, well, what does this actually mean? How do I actually practice this? And it's pointing at all of the other ones like, look, here are ways that you can help practice. And even if it's, just right speech, you're going to think about, well, what does that mean? How can I be mindful of my speech? And then eventually you get right mindfulness going, etc. And that leads into right action,
and then you're
etc.
the perfect parent.
Yes. Yes, that's it.
Perfect.
Okay, I think this is just a tiny bit unfair because isn't like right view the Four Noble Truths, fourth of which is this circle itself, so it's completely like self-referential by design.
I don't think right view is the Four Noble Truths.
Well, it is also them, isn't it?
I mean, it includes them, but I think that's it. Right view also includes a lot of other teachings as well, and you know, perspectival shifts, things like that.
Mm-hmm. I think the way that the book has been set up, I think that Thich Nhat Hanh would say, rather than the Four Noble Truths being a part of right view, it would be more of a prerequisite for, like, that. This actually, in fact, it's the other way around. The Four Noble Truths include all of these. The Eightfold Path is the last of the Noble Truths.
Right. This is the Eightfold Path. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the Eightfold Path, which is the final of the Four Truths, or first of the Four Truths, if you in the other way he put it in the other chapter. But you have to recognize that before you even get to this step, I guess. So in some way, yeah, right view would be the understanding that is reality. But like he wrote this whole chapter about what right view is and how do we get that and what kind of questions. Actually, no, the next chapter is about what kind of questions we ask, but they're all related to each other. It's so hard to separate out. Right thinking is the one where he put all of the questions or four practices related to it, what we should do to ask ourselves, and I think they all tie into together. This is so hard to talk about separately, but it definitely isn't limited to the Four Noble Truths because it is part of the Noble Truths.
Okay.
If you'd like to read the book, we have the PDF linked in the.
Oh yeah, that would have probably helped. Yeah, I get that. I get it. I'm just kind of trying to reflect on exactly how I came to this,
Mm-hmm.
and I do not think it was the Noble Truth Relay that I started with. But I guess anything works.
It's good questions, but I think we might have a slight disconnect between like we went through the whole first part of this book already.
Mm-hmm.
So following the which is actually laid out very, very well to follow the logic of, okay, we have this, which leads to that, which leads to that. The whole entire first part was setting up, okay, so now what do we do about it? And then this is what we do about it.
Yeah, I don't mean to derail you here or something. I'm just thinking that like a typical random person who just is outside of Buddhism and then somehow becomes aware of it will probably not follow the logical path from the beginning till the end. They just kind of start in the middle with something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it sort of like coalesces around that.
I think you're
And
right. A lot of people are going to come in it from the side because of something they heard or someone talked about, and I think that's important to be aware of.
yeah, I don't know like what was your experience? Like did you suddenly become aware of Four Noble Truths and started there or?
Uh,
I did.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Awesome.
Max went
I
for
kind of grew
formal
up.
philosophy education.
Yeah.
I grew up with the actually, maybe somewhat unfortunately, I kind of grew up in the idea of the Four Noble Truths without being actually taught them properly. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that life is, like, the nature of life is suffering. Suffering is kind of universal. Um, Things cause suffering, but didn't get through the full thing of, like, okay, here's what you can do to cease suffering
Yeah.
and help others to cease their suffering and, like, actually following in any kind of formal way
So you
the
just grew up
Eightfold
with sort
Path.
of a nihilistic pessimism.
I mean, I think it's kind of just permeated a lot of Asian cultures to begin with. Like, it's been around for long enough that I think these ideas are integral to a lot of Asian cultures. Even if they don't specifically say this is a Buddhist ideal, I it kind of seems in my experience that is how a lot of people operate, or at least some of these ideas seem to be borrowed from Buddhism. So they don't all follow the Eightfold Path, right? Or it's not always equally relevant or treated as equally important. But I think that the Eastern view on the whole is a lot more of you know, it's not always about being happy. I guess it's the sort of distorted version of it, whereas Buddhism says we can be happy. Here's how we be happy. It's just like a simpler way than what you might think. Uh, there's a lot of the. It's not like your happiness isn't actually important, and there are things that are above your happiness, that are whether that's honor or some kind of duty to the collective, whether that's your family or the community or your nation or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up with a lot of those kinds of views, I think kind of shaped for me, uh, like anybody to argue that suffering isn't the nature of life, that this isn't just a very common thing that's everywhere, would be like just bizarre to me, you know. Uh, this that's definitely missing something by itself. That's not everything, right? And then a lot of these things are things that become apparent. I mean, I would say before formally getting into Buddhism in this way, I already was trying to do a lot of these things just naturally flowing through that, right? Why is this happening? Okay, what can we do about it? What do we actually have control over? What can we actually do in ourselves that will transform the world around us and make things better? and getting to a lot of these points, and maybe is why so much of this just makes so much sense to me and seems like, yeah, that straight up it just is the truth, you know? Not because a monk had to tell me, but because that's what I lived already. But I definitely see the point of not coming from the beginning, so to speak, and just seeing. But honestly, I think this kind of his point is like, if you start to do any of these things, the other things will come to you, and you will see the. I mean, if you have right view, if you start to understand what is happening around you and why and what is causing that, like, you are going to be understanding that something is causing suffering and that you can do something about that, right? And that, and obviously that there is suffering. If you're doing any of these things, you will at some point kind of recognize it, right?
Interconnectedness is wonderful.
Mm.
That's what I was about to say, Max.
I stole your thunder, Ben.
Yeah, shame on you.
Book club's very good at stealing Ben's thunder.
Yeah.
Ben doesn't get any thunder. He's not allowed.
First rule.
Ben, why don't you spend 5 minutes thundering? Just get it out of the system.
Just get all your thunder out, Ben.
Okay, be right back. I'll just do some screaming at the wall.
Just go scream.
That's the way. Yes.
Could be cathartic. I don't know. As long as you do it mindfully. I don't know.
Until the wall starts screaming back at you.
That's probably not a good idea.
That's probably not good at all.
Could happen because the walls towards my neighbors are very thin, so.
Oh no!
Oh no! Oh no!
Could be yelling back.
Ben, stop it! That's how people
That's
in
exactly
Germany
their
talk.
accent. Yeah.
That's how people in Germany talk. Ben.
I'm sure. Communal catharsis.
On this page, I really like the emphasis on how right thinking can make our speech clear and beneficial, and I think it really starts to emphasize that interconnectedness of all these skills and practices. Of if I'm doing the first thing, then the other thing will happen.
Mm-hmm. I highlighted that as well.
And then
Actually,
on that
felt
next,
I felt like this chapter was kind of like we have a snowball and it's starting to roll down the hill now.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, other paragraph.
Oh yeah, on that same page, where at the end of that next paragraph, it says, "When we concentrate on our breathing, we bring body and mind back together and become whole again." I thought that was an interesting way to think of it, of becoming whole again, because of how we separate ourselves when we go into our mind, but not in the moment, and vice versa. I think when we over concentrate on what's happening in the body and not bring the mind into it as well.
Absolutely. Something else that seems very, like, in a way obvious, but at the same time, it's such a simple thing that we often don't do, right?
Yeah.
What did we have here? This one was in kind of an interesting point to point out too. Much of our thinking is unnecessary. Those thoughts are limited and do not carry much understanding in them. Sometimes we feel as though we have a cassette player in our head always running day and night and we cannot turn it off. We worry, become tense, and have nightmares. When we practice mindfulness, we begin to hear the cassette tape in our mind and we can notice whether our thinking is useful or not. So, not really like
Yeah.
that we need to stop thinking, but that we need to just be aware of when we are and what we're thinking. The remedy is not to make your mind stop doing that as much, but to be able to better control and be aware of whether or not that's something we should entertain, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is the bit you were talking about earlier in the other chapter, but all of
Yeah.
all of these questions or the 4 practices related to right thinking. So what we should do to make sure that we are, in fact, practicing right thinking. Are you sure?
Yeah. So I related it most.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I related it most quickly to like if there's a rope in your path and you perceive it as a snake, fear-based thinking will follow. And I think about how some of the things my students say or do is that rope that I've like, that's a snake. I have to attack it. And if I don't take the time to question that perception, I may undeservedly punish a student or try to discipline them when their behavior really wasn't coming from the place I think it was. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so the what I wrote down was, "Are you sure?" And the next I put, "Wrong perceptions cause incorrect thinking and unnecessary suffering," and then just kind of that reminder to question my perceptions so that I don't cause more suffering than necessary. You know.
Mm-hmm. And that bit in the middle too. I guess this whole paragraph. The more erroneous your perception, the more incorrect your thinking will be. So it's very important, this first step, right? And the next one, what am I doing? Which was both the mindfulness, he's saying, like asking this to a student just to remind that you are here in this moment doing something. What are you doing? Bring them back to this moment. But also that doing that will help you overcome the habit of wanting to complete things quickly. Things aren't always just like go, 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 go. It's okay to just slow down, actually think about what we are doing in a more active way instead of just going on autopilot.
Well, we got a little bit into a food discussion last time, and that same thing just like comes back to me of stopping to ask myself what I'm doing when I'm snacking. And so that I can appreciate, like, why am I doing this action? Is it because I'm actually hungry or because I'm bored? Was it an automatic action? Was it a mental craving I had to consume? Like, what is going on?
You are feeding your mind.
Sometimes I'm just feeding some probably stray gut bacteria that desires sugar.
I think it's the same thing.
Same difference. Oh, you're gonna get into some interesting theories about gut flora, eh? About how they affect whole body and mind. It's so fascinating. Anyway.
Just to carry that one more step. Maybe we could do this with our food too, Des. So when your thinking is not carrying you away and you do things in mindfulness, you'll be happy and a resource for many others. This always like pushing beyond. It's not just about what you're doing in yourself, but we have to connect this to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
If we're not thinking about what am I doing, if we're not being mindful, we're not just ignoring ourselves and what our bodies are doing. We're kind of not there for anybody else either.
Right.
This third one's my favorite though. Hello, habit energy. This is my one. That we stick to our habits, even if they cause us to suffer.
Yeah.
Pointing out our way of working is rather compulsive and prevents us from having real contact with life. Again, not very mindful. Our way of acting depends on our thinking, and our way of thinking depends on our energy, our habit energies. So when we recognize this, we only need to say, hello, habit energy, and make good friends with our habitual patterns of thinking and acting. When we can accept these ingrained thoughts and not feel guilty about them, they will lose much of their power over us. I like this one a lot. Because I think both that we ignore a lot of our habits. And the image he used in the previous chapters about we're like riding on a horse and we don't really know where the horse is taking us. We're just kind of along for the ride, and but the horse is our habit energy, so we must say, hello, habit energy. I see you are here. Like, I know what you're doing, and if you can be aware of it, then you have maybe you can choose to do something else instead of just mindlessly letting the horse take you wherever it wants to go.
Right.
And this is important, though. Does not feel guilty. I think that's an essential part of this step. To accept that it's there, to recognize that it's there, to accept it, and then not feel guilty, but just better understand it. That's the first step to having a better habit energy, is to know which ones you have now. And that doesn't mean that you sit there and go like, oh, I'm such a horrible person because XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, now you know what they are, so learn to live with it in a different way.
Yeah.
Which I suppose goes into number 4, Bodhicitta. Deep wish to cultivate understanding in ourselves in order to bring happiness to many beings.
Preferably to ourselves at first.
Well, it's sort of a prerequisite, it seems, doesn't it, right? We had to cultivate, it says cultivate understanding in ourselves in order to bring happiness. Like, as if you can't do this if you don't have this. You have to do it for yourself first.
Yeah.
Well, this image down here is very good too.
Yeah, I highlighted a bunch of that. It's tying into that the seeds we plant, right? And swapping out and changing of pegs. I thought that was really interesting, and I liked where he said if we are constantly assailed by unwholesome patterns of thought, we need to learn how to change the peg and replace those patterns with wholesome thoughts. I think this stood out to me only because personally I have been struggling with this particular skill recently. And so spending some time to assess what pegs I have and what needs replacing and how to do that has been important to me recently.
I agree. Maybe one of the more challenging, because there's so many steps that go into that, isn't there? You have to first be aware that you're doing that in the first place. You have to see that it is a rotten peg. Then you have to know how to replace it with something else.
Right.
You have to know what to replace it with that isn't going to be also rotten.
Yeah, I can't replace one bad habit with another. That doesn't help.
Mm-hmm. I think people do that often. You could say, "Wow, this is kind of toxic," and then just like go to the next one that also happens to be not actually that much better than the
I
old
don't
one.
do meth anymore, but now I'm an alcoholic.
Maybe some people think like that, right? Oh, if I'll just replace it with this other thing that is also not really doing me any favors.
But at least it's not that other thing.
And maybe it is slightly better for some people. That could be an improvement, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it's not really healthy. And ultimately, we should be able to get something that's actually going to help us. Choose the best one. That's more sustainable and
So are habits really just a way of sort of saving your brain? Instead of having to think all the time, which hurts, you just kind of like run the same thing over and over, and that's
Right.
easier. So you're basically saving energy. Yay!
The problem is
Yay.
it's not adaptive.
What is it?
It's not adaptive though. So like you can set a subroutine that just runs on your subconscious and have that just go whenever certain conditions are met, such as like if you walk past this light switch, turn it off after this thing happens or
I
whatever.
call that a tripwire habit.
Right. But the problem with those is they happen without, after a while, even your active involvement. They just occur. And then if that same mechanism gets applied to something that is only sometimes uh, the thing that you need to do, then it starts to become a problem. This can also happen with other things. It's just something you do incidentally. It's not even good for you. Like, that's the whole problem, is that it doesn't adjust itself. It doesn't involve itself with the actual goings on. It's just a static pattern.
Right.
So being mindful and engaging with that, even though it's the same action, not only do you have a greater depth of experience with it, even if it's just flipping a switch, but also you can be present for it and you can adapt it if, for example, the light is on and you would normally turn it off, but this time it's already off. You know not to reach for it and flip the switch anyway because that's what you always do.
Right.
I mean, that makes perfect sense and it sounds wonderful. So why don't we all do it? It's probably because it's
Because
costly,
it's
no?
hard.
Because
Requires
being
effort.
aware, there's a term in psychology called cognitive miser. People don't like to think unless they have to most of the time, and being aware is a skill more than anything, I think, and it's one that has to be cultivated through
Yeah.
thinking, and that's just terrible for most people. So I think you're right. I mean, these automated subconscious routines are about saving time and energy. They are more efficient because you don't have to bother thinking about it. But because you're not thinking about it, you're not being mindful, and therefore sometimes the subroutine can't handle the difference in situation that is currently happening.
So connected to what you're saying, Max, actually just like a couple paragraphs down, the Thich Nhat Hanh gets into right thinking, and he puts it as, it is a map that can help us find our way, but when we arrive at our destination, we need to put down the map and enter the reality fully. And I think it's sort of similar, this conversation that's going on, because you're talking about the roadmaps you've drawn in your mind so that you can do them quickly and go fast, but having to go through them mindfully enough to be able to stop and assess what's really going on is an important step as well.
Right. And we have to remind ourselves that it is worth the effort of being actively involved rather than just letting the old pattern play out because it's good enough. We have to remind ourselves that this is important and worth it and actually meaningful. Which I'm not very good at personally. But
I think that's right. It even goes back to that, few pages back when we were just talking about the what am I doing? What am I doing? And he's talking about even something
exactly.
like doing your dishes, but if you mindlessly just wash all of the dishes, your work will be without merit because you weren't really involved in it at all. Doesn't matter how simple, how small. Or in that case, that's not even really a habit. Washing dishes isn't necessarily the habit of this person in this example. It's just being present in everything that you do will make everything that you do worth your time as well. And literally, that's all that you have is what you're doing in the present moment. And if you're not in that moment, then where are you living at all?
That's a good question.
Well,
I was doing this like funny little practice where essentially my wife would hide candy somewhere in the house. And I have this like tiny little zebra thing, and so it would be under the zebra. And the goal was to actually mindfully find it without looking for it. And I got quite good at it. I would get it, let's say 1 in 2 days, that sort of cadence, right? And then like a month later, she tells me like, "So when are you gonna find the last one?" And I'm like, "Oh, I thought we stopped already." And it's been another month now, and I still haven't found it. So I don't know what she did, but like it's impossible. Is mindfulness, right? I just realized I don't even see my house. I see some very specific areas of the house where there's something to look at, and the rest of it I'm completely blind to. It's crazy.
I think that's an interesting thing to point out. We spend so much time in these spaces, and I would like to think optimistically that that's the core of the minimalism movement, right? Is to become fully present in the space that you do have. but I don't know that that's true. But mostly, I think that's such an interesting thought. It's something I've thought about recently as well. Is am I in this space? Why am I in this space? And then extending my awareness of it and not just like shoving a bunch of crap in a corner to forget about for 2 years.
Yeah, that's exactly this. Yeah. Hopefully, I find it earlier than 2 years because it's probably gonna rot or something.
Depends on the kind of candy.
Oh yeah, that's a scary thought. Yes, but you're right.
If it's dry and has no oil, we'll be fine. Well, the last thing I had on this chapter, I guess, was just I think what we are trying to do here too. The easiest way to keep unwholesome thoughts from arising is to live in a wholesome environment, a community that practices mindful living. That dwelling in a good environment is preventative medicine.
Nah.
Yeah, but who really does that?
Well, the monks
True.
do it,
Hmm?
at least.
Yeah, at minimum, the monks are doing it.
Yeah, but they also have their patterns and their biases, and they may also be too hung up on ritual to, get really to the core of things. But maybe not. Maybe they can do that.
I don't know. When I go to, let's say, a retreat, stuff becomes so much easier. Of course, you are not worrying about like daily stuff, right? But just the presence of the people around you that, for instance, go and sit down and meditate. You go and sit down and meditate, and it's a no-brainer, right?
It's a supportive atmosphere, and you're with like-minded people, so you can more easily fall into that mindfulness groove. It's like you're being helped along with it.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I don't deny that.
And the weird thing is, this happens even when it's like a silent retreat. Like nobody's saying anything, and still somehow they are supporting you just by being there.
It's amazing how much environmental structures or just mutual understandings about our social engagements can facilitate shifts in perspective and practice. I've had coffee, so I can use big words now, and that makes me happy. But like, I've never been on a
Big
retreat.
words.
I'm kind of almost envious about people who get to go on these retreats because they sound wonderful, and I've seen like footage of them, and it's so, I mean, inviting. It's there's no pressure. It's just helpful, right? It's a setting that helps you reestablish or I guess establish even for the first time for some people this state of mindfulness and practice. And I think that's just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that thing is great. It's not usually 100% perfect. There's gonna be some squeaky wheel. There's gonna be some sort of issue, some sort of trouble, but that is also helpful. That's the
Absolutely.
crazy part. Yeah,
I
that
mean,
in
the
that environment, conflict is actually helpful.
right. Well, it's because it helps, bring up some of the things. Maybe someone has an issue, they say, and other people can relate to that. Or it helps other people think about, well, how do we manage this if they've never considered it before? It's just like it's a community effort at that point.
Exactly, exactly. Let's say person A has a conflict with person B, and it resolves a problem with person C. Just
Right.
like yeah, perfect.
I'll BRB.
Go team, we did it.
We did do it. I guess it's okay to say, well, Max is gone. But I like to think that we are, although maybe not quite the same as, like, Plum Village, which is what Thich Nhat Hanh had created for this very purpose, but I like to think that we're kind of doing this here,
Hopefully.
that we're trying to make a community that's practicing mindful living and hopefully making it a little bit easier for each other to
I mean,
do some of these things, ask these questions.
the thing is, I mean, I'm agreeing that it's certainly helpful. On the other hand, it's an online space, and I mean, usually most of us aren't online all the time, or at least in our day-to-day life we aren't. What I'm saying is this isn't an outside or an everyday environment, so to speak. So
We don't live here.
we don't live here exactly. So it's better than nothing, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say better than nothing, just because, like, realistically, how many of us are about to leave our lives and go join a monastery?
Yeah.
He didn't say anything like that so far in this book that I noticed, but in I know he said in other places about making your home a sangha, like your family. That you can, if you practice these things, even if your family doesn't really practice everything, but the whole idea of the more that you do these things, the more that creates the environment you're in, and it will transform the environment and the things that other people are doing, and as they see what you're doing, then
Yeah.
that you're living proof. If you're effectively doing these things and you're changing and you're better able to manage life and you're less stressed because of it and you are smiling more because of it, that the people around you eventually, and maybe this takes a long time, but eventually, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
they notice those things and maybe they start to do those too, or that you can share some of these practices with those people that are important to you, whether that's your children or significant other or your roommate, or if you live by yourself, I guess then you're kind of already living in that. Then it goes outside your home, but to make
Mm-hmm.
that place where you live into an environment, if it isn't already, to make it into an environment where that is a common practice and where that does become easier, and that you find these ways to encourage yourself and others to live in a way that's more conducive doing this kind of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that old adage comes to mind that you cannot change the world or people around you, but you can change yourself, and as you say, then you will be radiating that out into the world and maybe make a bit of a difference.
I ask what everybody else, I guess, karma. So the concept karma. I always hear people talking about karma like it's your good deeds come back to you in the sense of the universe is like rewarding you, or if you do something that's bad, that bad things will happen to you, like almost that the universe has cursed you, but this is your own fault, like you're having a punishment. But that's not, I mean, now my understanding of what it actually is supposed to mean is that when you do things that are more skillful, that has a positive effect on the environment and on other people around you, and therefore the energy that you're returned with will also be better because of what you, like, the things that you did create positive effects in your environment and in other people who then are more likely to do something positive in return, and that
Mm-hmm.
the energy kind of feeds off itself,
I
rather than somebody punishing you or
yeah.
rewarding you, that it's just that there are effects. It's a cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
the things that you're doing are making good things happen.
I would say that's how I've tended to see it, is that it's the natural consequences of what you're putting out in the world. It's not so much a divine intervention as it is just, like you said, how you're affecting the environment. And if I'm putting out a lot of negativity, then the karma around me is going to be negative, and the energy around me is going to be negative.
There's this unfortunate tendency, at least from what I've seen, to want to try and prop up karma as exactly that sort of divine retributive force that maintains a balance or something. And like, I mean, I understand the inclination to want that as a sort of system of order or justice or whatever, but it's just not feasible. Like, there's no one behind the scenes keeping a tally of all the good and bad things you've done and measuring out your circumstances to meet that condition. It's just like what you said. It's what you do has ripples, and sometimes they bounce off of other people and come back to you. And whatever those ripples are, usually maintain that form of energy, whether it's positive or negative or whatever. So it tends to be, in that sense, kind of sticky, but it's not always going to come back to you. So if you do something and it's harmful, sometimes you won't see harmful consequences of that, or at least you won't immediately. And sometimes you won't at all that you can recognize. The same thing with good things. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and do good things anyway, even if it doesn't come back to you, because making the world better in a certain sense does make it better for you, even if you don't directly see any benefits. It's just not as palatable as saying, "Oh, there's a goalkeeper in the sky that makes sure I get what's mine."
Is karma always self-focused too? Like,
Oh no,
or is that also something that has been misconstrued? That it's just simply, as Des said, consequences. And
it
they may be
right.
consequences for yourself, or they could be consequences, like you said, that you never see at all, which may or may not. I mean, some of the consequences of things we do, we could die before they ever could, before we would
Right.
ever see the actual consequence. But yeah, if I am, I don't know, rude to somebody, they may not ever, maybe that doesn't come back to me, but then they go and behave more rudely to somebody else in their life, like the next person they interact with, and they're in a bad mood, and now they're like, it's spreading, right? Like multiplicative continues on, whether or not I ever see or talk to any, like, especially if I was rude to all of you, I may not see any of that. Like, I don't live by you, but it spreads, which in fact means we could just be tainting everything and like making it worse and worse and worse. There's no balance of the right and wrong and good and bad and positive negative,
Geez,
is
Lee,
there?
stop making it worse. God.
My instinct is to say that it only feels personal, or I don't remember how you said it, specific to an individual, because that's how we're perceiving it, obviously. But I think it also because it's the only one we can control. Whether or not it is or isn't, to me, is inconsequential, because I live in this moment and I live in this body, and this is what I can control and change and affect.
Well, if I imagine that everything is basically just this like super complicated system of causes and effects and energies flowing here and there and stuff like that, there's really no good or bad in all of that. It's just all this stuff happening. And as life, we have developed the sense of self and self-preservation and good and bad for us, right? So it would be very natural to see that if you do a good thing, that thing makes somebody else happy, which is good, and they do something that's again good. I'm not sure I'm going with that. It's just, I think it's beyond good and bad karma, right? But we very much will see effects that are kind of aligned with this sort of perception of ours. Sometimes, not all the time, as Gong said. Hope it's not too nihilistic or something.
No,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure I understood that right. So you're saying that our perceptions of sometimes the effects may also be different because we have our own conception of good or bad based on whether or not it's positive for us personally.
Yes, I think so. I think the concept of good and bad is something we have sort of evolved for the sole purpose of surviving, like as a species or as life, maybe in general, right? While if you look really deeply at the underlying, everything that's happening, like if you take it apart far enough, there's gonna be no good and no bad. It's just some sort of atoms bouncing off each other, and that's it. See what I mean?
That's right, Mbala. Tear down dualism.
Yay.
Go team.
Go us.
We solved karma.
We
Well,
solved karma.
now that dualism is over, what are we gonna do next?
Try and take
Well-
over the world.